Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the continuation of yesterday's board meeting regarding budget. This time we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, is there any announcements from the Board of Supervisors or staff before we get started? I do have one announcement. I'd like to send our hopes and prayers to the officers and the congressmen that were attacked in Washington, D.C. this morning. The latest information I have that 2 are critical. There are the Capitol Police who returned fire in defense of the congressman at the practice for the congressional baseball game. So we'll keep them in our thoughts. Madam Clerk, do you have any announcements, and we will be able to proceed?
Supervisor Clapp will not be with us today.
Okay. I believe District Attorney Yook, I hope I say that right sometimes. I understand you completed your presentation on yesterday?
I did.
Okay, and that would give an opportunity for any board questions, any further questions by the board?
Good morning. Thank you
Good morning.
for your presentation. You brought up an interesting point about having a cannabis industry crimes unit. Do you have any kind of a work plan or how you would propose to put that together, over what timeline you feel that could be accomplished?
Once we have positions in place, it would be up and running. So I'm not really sure how to answer that question. It's building it. It's receiving the funding and building at least the one position that does not exist, and then recruiting those people and putting them to work.
I would say if the board was to have a consensus to go in that direction, how long then would it take for you to put that together?
If there was funding for the positions, the one position, we would be at the mercy of HR's schedule in building the position, figuring out the specs of it, the pay scale, and then getting it approved by the board, and then opening a recruitment. Okay. So I would guess that it would be at least 6 months, if not a year, before we would actually have a person in that position, if we started now for that particular position. For the DAI position, optimistically it would be 6 months, but very likely it could be longer than that, up to a year as well, to have a person in that position. For the DDA and the support staff position, we would probably have staff up and running in those particular positions in 3 months optimistically.
Okay.
3 or 4 months optimistically.
Not to hold you to any timelines, but just simply so that there's a clear understanding that this wouldn't be an immediate situation. It will take time to put people functionally into the system and create it so that it works.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. But it has to start with the board to support the unit, to provide funding for it, to provide the direction to HR to start the work that they have to do. And I don't know what HR's timeline is. They have a lot of struggles. They do the best they can. But this is a whole new exercise for them in creating this position that doesn't exist. It does exist in other counties. There are other DA's offices that have forensic accountants on board. So it's not completely inventing the wheel, but it would be a new position for the county. So there would have to be that groundwork that needs to be done. But until the board decides to figure out a way to fund the unit and support the unit, we can't even get started on that. So that's, conservatively, it would be a year before we'd actually have the staff up and running.
And that does include a forensic financial analyst?
Correct. It would be a 4-person unit.
And as I understand it now, that we are working on ways to respond to your needs regarding your office location?
Victim services was my priority, and now that we do have a light at the end of the tunnel for victim services, because Cal OES did agree to allow my staff to use a portion of the funding that we received under the grant for a leased property. The second part of that is bringing forward the board packet to approve the lease. And I think we're working on that, hopefully for the next board meeting, or because of the timeline for packets, it might be a couple of board meetings from now. But assuming that goes through, my victim services division will be taken care of in more appropriate housing, and we're very excited about that. So once that's taken care of, because as I said, that was my priority, then I do have a request, and it's been an ongoing request for the main office of the DA's office. And I have not, I can't say that there's anything in the works for that. It's just been my request. And I don't know what potential funding sources there are with the county. I don't know the ins and outs of the Judicial Construction Fund or the Criminal Justice Facilities Funds as far as their availability for projects like this. I don't know. I just bring those up as potentials. And I'm hopeful that the CIO and the auditor's office will take a look at that and perhaps provide the board with information as to if they are potential funding sources, and if they are not, looking to the CIP or looking to other locations at Government Center or around San Andreas to see if there are better locations, maybe shifting some office spaces. I really don't know. I know that that is on the CIO's list of priorities for this summer, amongst all the other priorities. Maybe in July, convening the Master Space Committee. We did have a Master Space Plan Committee a few years ago, and a lot of time was spent on that with many department heads trying to figure it out, those plans. I don't know where they sit now. I don't know if they went by the wayside with a changeover in CAOs. I really don't know. I'm kind of approaching it as if it's a new day with a new CAO and a new vision for what we need at Government Center, but I do wish to be involved in those plans. So to say that there's movement on a solution for the issue with my main office and my investigations, and my extra trailer, the single wide with the ramp that is not fit for what it's meant for. It's a ramp that theoretically is for to accommodate wheelchairs and things like that, but it's not safe for that. When we have to meet with someone in a wheelchair, we meet them somewhere else, for instance. Also, if we have to warn anybody who's wearing heels or something other than flat shoes to be very, very careful, because if you hit the step wrong all along the ramp, it chips off. The wood is quite old. It is not a good or safe situation. So to say that we have movement, I think, is overstating it. It is something I put in my budget memo, but it's been an issue for many years. And like I said, it's been temporary housing for over 12 years. Okay. So it's my hope.
Thank you.
But I understand the realities of the other needs of the other departments as well. Okay.
Supervisor Tofinelli?
Yeah, Barbara, can you please forward an email your PowerPoint presentation to me that you had yesterday?
And I had a request from Diane for that as well. The issue is that that was my laptop. When I put it back on my docking station in order to do that, it's not working. So, and if it's not hooked up, it's not hooked up to the network, so I could not. It was something I was working on late yesterday and this morning, and it's still not fixed. So,
well, if you happen to
as
get
soon
it,
as it's, as soon as I can, I will.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Any further questions? Supervisor Garamendi?
Thank you very much, Barbara. At your presentation yesterday, we started off and you broke down how that $483,000 cut impacts you. $500,000 needed for the Cannabis Industry Crimes Unit. If this board, using this baseline that we started with, came up with more money, what would be your priority?
My priority for the upcoming fiscal year would certainly be to save the positions that are slated to be frozen. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And my staff is working at bare bones as it is. So I can't afford to lose an attorney, and the paralegal position has been a very good position for my office and the current building official, well, the interim building official as well. So I don't know how the new building official will feel about the position and how highly it will be valued in building, but I can tell you for my office, the position did a very, very good job. Even though it's a 2-day-a-week position, it filled in that gap, and it really did a lot more than you would expect a 2-day-a-week position to be able to do. And I think a lot of that was because of the partnership we had with Code and the crossover nature of certain of our duties. The next priority for my office would be the DAI, filling it mid-year. And again, that is an optimistic fill date. It might take a lot longer than that, but we have to start building up our investigations. The sheriff's office highlighted the issue that they're having with their detectives being down to 2. The fact that my office is down to 1 has really exacerbated that problem. So when there are investigations that the sheriff's office could use our assistance on, it's very limited if we can help at all, especially with the number of cases we had this last fiscal year. The DAI had to be in court supporting my attorneys on those cases ongoing, and if it's 3 weeks of trial, that DAI is booked up for those 3 weeks. And it's not just the 3 weeks that you see publicly, it's the 3-month buildup behind that, contacting witnesses, figuring out how they're going to get there, going and getting witnesses, serving sensitive witnesses. It's all that legwork that has to be done behind the scenes that you don't necessarily see. So since I have the 1, he's it. He's doing all of that. He's doing the last-minute search warrants. So our ability to assist the sheriff's office investigations has been reduced to almost nothing. So you have this, this impact that is greater than the sum of its parts, with the sheriff's office being low on detectives and my office being low on investigators. So, I support their request to have more staff and more detectives, because that will help my office. And I haven't discussed it with the sheriff this year, but certainly in years past, they've been very supportive of my office receiving more resources in terms of investigation, because it helps them as well. As I said, we used to have 3, we have 1. And he's hung on as long as he can, and he's looking at retirement. So we need to start building back our investigation. So that is my priority, to build back up our base of operations. So that would be my priority. The cannabis unit is my response, and what I think would be a direction the county could go in as a policy decision, as a method to build some infrastructure. Of course, we can't go back in the past, but it would have been, I think, a good thing to have built some of this infrastructure before we went down this road. But obviously, no one has a time machine. But it's still something that I think if the county was able to build and start building now, maybe we can work on a more robust response in a year. And that is optimistic. Because as I said, there are plenty of laws out there. There are plenty of actions that we could be taking, but it is a new operation. It is a new burden. It is a new practice. It is the mixed civil and criminal practice of very specialized areas of the law, and we would need this unit to do it. And as far as it being a unit, the other piece of that is that would be housed with the sheriff's office, so they can work together as a team. I think I said this very briefly at the study session. One issue is the guidance and advice and legal support that this unit could provide for the frontline officers on the MET team who are going out and investigating. Currently, because of my lack of staffing, when they have a question or when they want a search warrant reviewed, for instance, it's whoever is available in my office, okay? Instead of the same person advising them real time, because it's whoever's available, it's a scheduling issue. They've got to wait until somebody's available. That can cause 2, 3, 4 week-long delay in a search warrant review and a workup, so that we can go to the judge to see if the judge will sign off on the warrant. If we had someone who was there working closely with the team, these matters can flow much more easily, much more smoothly, and much more quickly. And the faster we can move on the support for the sheriff's office, the faster they can move. So it's a whole systematic change. You know, it's a new idea. Well, it's new because we haven't done it before. It's not new because I've been saying it for a year. So, you know, but it's something that, because it will take so long to build, you know, I bring it up, and just know that if you were able to support it and find support for it, it's going to be about a year. But that clock keeps ticking as long as it keeps getting pushed down the road before some structural changes can be made.
Thank you.
Any other comments by the board? Thank you,
Okay, thank you.
Attorney York. Next, I understand we'll hear from probation.
Good morning. Sam Leach, Chief Probation Officer, and also Chair of the Community Corrections Partnership, otherwise known as CCP. Thank you for allowing me to present this morning. I appreciate the time in front of you. I haven't had the opportunity to present in front of this board very much. I think I was here last in January. So I wanted to take a little bit of time, and I think everybody understands what the DA does. They understand better, you know, what the sheriff does. Probation is sort of a mystery to a lot of the public, and I think even for some of us, you'd probably be surprised to know some of the things we do. So I do want to spend a few minutes highlighting some of the things that my department does and some of the things that we've come to do over the last 3 years. We're responsible for supervising about 1,000 people in this community. Out of those 1,000 people, we have juveniles, we have adults, we have the realigned population that the state gave to us through AB 109. The county right now is funding county general fund 4 of our 13 sworn positions. So these 3 that are sitting back here, Jackie, Kim, and Ben, raise your hands. Those 3 and me are being funded by county general fund right now as far as sworn positions go, for a county population of 45,000 and 1,000 people that we supervise. But we do have 13 sworn positions. The other 9 are coming from grant-funded, state-funded positions. So we've worked pretty hard to make sure that and 13, frankly, is a good staffing level for us. If we could have 13 filled positions on a regular basis, we'd be okay. We have a good decision-making model for how we do things. We're responsive to the courts. There's a lot of good things we can do when we're actually able to have 13 sworn positions filled. The problem is, if you look at this over time, you can clearly see that we had a lot of county general fund positions dating back to 07, 06, and it's slowly been kind of creeping in. And I hate to say the word supplanting, but at some point it looks pretty bad in a controller audit that the county general fund keeps getting cut and cut and cut from my department, but somehow our positions are still there after realignment, after SB 678. And I think Rebecca could probably back me on this issue. We haven't spoken about it, but as far as if you look at the org charts and how it's been changing over time, it's a concern from here if I'm cut more than what we've already been cut. So let's get into some of that. This is my 4th budget cycle here. We still, I'm proud to say, honestly, I'm proud to say that we've cut general fund contribution to my department from 1.3 million before I arrived to we're at 1.101 million right now. So we've cut our general fund contribution by 15%, and that's fine. We're functioning at an okay level right now. We're just dancing a very thin line. Here's what we've been able to accomplish since that time, because some of you, I know Chairman Oliveira probably remembers a time when probation was quite a struggle in this county. It wasn't that long ago that our reputation was not the brightest in the county. We had a lot of infighting. We were the subject of grand jury issues. We didn't necessarily have much of a standing even with the courts, and I'm appointed by the judges. So since 2014, here's some of the things I want to detail. Besides the fact that we've worked within the scope of cutting our general fund contribution, we've banked adequate reserves in our dedicated funds for the first time. When I got here, we had nothing saved in SB 678, which is our state contribution for reducing our prison revocation rate. Right now, at the end of this fiscal year, we'll be at about 300,000, and I would project that we'll be at about 500,000 in those reserves by the end of the next fiscal year. Some of that's through responsibility. A lot of it is through reducing our prison revocation rates because we're offering programming and we're supervising people correctly, which we frankly weren't doing as well before. So it's a combination of better business and just a little bit of fiscal responsibility, but then also, frankly, that we couldn't fill some of the positions in the time that we wanted to fill them. And that'll stop at some point. In the realignment account, you know, we were around 800,000 when we got here. We should be pushing over 2 million at the close of books this fiscal year, which is a lot better position for if the money goes away, if there's an economic downturn, if our contribution gets less, for us to continue the services that we offer as a Community Corrections Partnership AB 109 team, which involves the sheriff, which involves Health and Human Services, which involves the DA, the public defender, Angels Camp PD, and the courts. So we've been responsible enough to start banking that money. So between those two accounts, which is I'm responsible for both, we'll be at $2.5 million at least by the end of next year. So we're healthy there with our state monies and our reserve accounts on our dedicated funds. But that doesn't mean that we can cut back the county general fund contribution of our basic core services to probation and be able to supplant using those monies. And I just want to make sure that that's said publicly. What else have we done? So besides the fiscal stuff, you know, we've built a management team. When I got here, the interim chief who was ahead of me left after 3 weeks, and it was just me. So to run the whole county probation department, juvenile, adult, 109, I had no management team whatsoever. Since that time, we've, you know, Kim Craddock has become the assistant chief. We have 2 supervisors, and that's, you know, I know, well, Al's not here this morning, but Al Segala would question, well, are you top heavy? Well, those employees are expensive. Sorry, Kim. Sorry, Ben. Those employees are expensive. But you know what's more expensive is when we're out of compliance with things like a DOJ audit, which we were. Things like our Title 4E revenue was a major issue because there's no way we would have passed a 4E audit in the beginning of 2014. 4E is one of our big juvenile revenue streams. I believe we've projected for $80,000 as of this year. The list could go on and on. But having my supervisors in place, keeping us up with continuum of care reform, where we're changing the way that statewide, whether or not juveniles go to group homes for extended periods, or whether we can actually locate fit and willing relatives and, you know, build some resilience in those homes where we know they'll have better long-term outcomes. That is a huge legislative change statewide. How would I have done that without a juvenile supervisor? When I got here, we had 2 juvenile probation officers funded, which was down from 5 about a decade ago. And right now we're funding 1 juvenile position with county general funds, which is a lady named Savannah who just started on Monday. And that's what the county is paying for when it comes to juvenile probation officers. We have some support positions, okay, but as far as officers go, 1 county general funded juvenile officer. So the management team is doing a great job. These guys are fantastic, and they're saving us from risk. We have reduced our exposure to risk, in my opinion, substantially since building that up. We've implemented a lot of programming that either wasn't here or wasn't working well, including Parent Project, where we have groups of parents coming in, parents of very difficult adolescents that either have their adolescents in our system or one of the other systems that these kids touch. And these parents come in for a 12-week group that becomes a support group, and we restructure how they work with their difficult teens. It's important stuff. The Courage to Change program, which has actually been talked about quite a bit in our county. A lot of our offenders have gone through that. Cognitive behavioral techniques and basically looking at their antisocial values, attitudes, and beliefs. Substance abuse, social capital, as I call it, or their social connections and who's around them. There's a lot of things that come out of that. And then also changing offender behavior, which is done by one of our clinicians at the Day Reporting Center. So we've built that programming up. This is all since the beginning of 2014. Our culture's better. You know, Judy, when's the last time you heard from us?
Very long time.
Our culture's good. That said, people are getting tired. You know, I'm sorry for my negative tone, but, you know, I want my staff to see that I'm standing up for them today. You know, these guys are exhausted. I understand the fiscal position the county's in, and I want to do my part. I just don't want it to be completely on our backs disproportionately. We've hired great people. It's been slow, and I do want to give a lot of credit to HR in working with us on that. The folks at HR have done a great job of going to bat for us. It just is what it is. It is really hard to hire people at a starting rate that's 11% lower than our neighbors. And it's getting harder. You know, people take 3% less money and maybe 5% less money if they're happy. You start getting up over 10% and it's really tough to keep them, much less recruit them. And our recruiting numbers are getting lower and lower and lower, despite the fact that we've got, I'll name drop Andrea Troublefield in the, did I get her last name right? Andrea Troublefield, yeah. In HR doing a fantastic job of trying to build up the techniques we use in recruiting. But again, money talks. So we're doing what we can. We've hired some great people. I want to keep them. The sheriff already hammered home that point, so I won't push it any further. We're in the same boat. We restructured, in a partnership with the Community Corrections Partnership and AB 109, we voted to restructure the County Day Reporting Center. It used to be run by a private corporation. We voted them out. Now it's County Services, which enabled us to actually partner with behavioral health to get 2 licensed clinicians, one at the jail and one at the Day Reporting Center. And those clinicians are able to provide higher level clinical services that frankly didn't exist here and don't exist in a lot of rural counties. So much so that we signed on a partnership with the Council of State Governments for something called Stepping Up. If you haven't heard of Stepping Up or you're not familiar with it, check your NACO magazines. You'll see that Stepping Up is a nationwide effort to reduce the prevalence of mentally ill offenders in our institutions. We all know, I mean, you probably know better than anybody, Supervisor Oliveira, what it's like to have mentally ill offenders in our jails and the issues that it causes there, as well as knowing that it's not the place for mentally ill people and that when they come out, a lot of times they're worse than they were when they went in because of the institutionalization. So it's become the de facto mental health center. So we're working slowly and surely over time with the Council of State Governments as one of the model Stepping Up counties for how we reduce those rates. And I'm honored that Sheriff DiBasilio and everybody else over there has been so great in partnering and being as transparent as they are, letting people come in and look at the data. Good stuff. We fixed a myriad of Title IV claiming issues. That's stuff that you guys never see, but it's important behind the scenes work to help us stand up in an audit. Last thing you guys need is me coming to you and saying, hey, we have to give back $300,000 or $500,000 because we weren't documenting our paperwork, because we were cutting corners, because we weren't staffed appropriately. We implemented a new case management system. So if you want data, what do you want to hear? I couldn't have said that to you in 2015. Like a lot of agencies, we just didn't have what we needed to get you basic recidivism data, offense data. Are our programs working? How do we know? All that kind of stuff. I do want to come back to you guys in the fall with a more, a bigger data presentation, but this isn't necessarily the forum for all of that stuff. Motivational interviewing is a big part of what we do. That's how we interact with people. Are we just lecturing and shaming and blaming offenders, or are we working with them in some way that moves them forward long term? One of the first things that I say when I'm training staff is, look, we used to tell people in probation that, we want them to get through probation successfully, and then whatever happens to them after, hey, that's not our problem. No, I want people to get off probation successfully, and I want them to not come back to us. And that's a shift in the way that probation thinks and operates. That means we have to be concerned with their long-term sustainable change. And one of the big parts that we do as officers is, motivational interviewing. Do we know how to engage people in wanting to change their lives? And these are difficult people. When you're on patrol, and you guys do a much harder job than we do, so don't take this wrong. But when you're on patrol, occasionally you come across somebody who's not, the most difficult person in the county. Occasionally. Everybody we're working with is, we got the top couple of percent. And then the ones that we're actually spending the most time with are the highest risk cases. Because we now have a validated assessment tool that may have been stated on record but was not used properly. So we've gone out and bought a validated assessment tool. We've been properly trained by the University of Cincinnati. We've run our own norming studies and all this kind of geeky stuff you guys probably don't care about. But basically, we're able to pick who are the people most likely to recidivate in our county, and how do we prioritize our time on them and making sure that they don't come back to us. If we were to take a significant step back, we can just go back to the old days. When I worked, early on, fine, you had 150 cases and you patted them on the head once a month and you wrote warrants most of the time and you really didn't connect with anybody. There wasn't any long-term sustainable change. My employees have reviews. Most of this stuff goes to staff. My management team saves my butt on a daily basis, as do my DPOs. I have some fantastic deputy probation officers over there. The reviews, hey, every employee should have a review on time. And I can't tell you how many employees didn't have reviews when I got here. You know why? We didn't have a management team. I mean, at least today I can say that, look, these guys are being evaluated, they're being coached, they're being mentored. The ones that are doing well are not only staying, but they're engaged as a contributing member of our society and as a contributing member of our department, where they want our department to be better next year than it is this year. The clinicians, the 2 clinicians that I mentioned, that is a huge change for our county. I just got to reiterate it. The CCP funded a victim advocate position, which I think was the start of something much bigger, to be quite frank. I mean, what were we doing for victims before that, DAU? I mean, not to say we didn't have some efforts, but it was pretty minimal. Yeah, I mean, post-sentencing, what are we doing for victims? We don't want to lose them in our efforts for restorative justice. That's still being funded out of AB 109. Fines and fees are a difficult thing for us. Right now, we're kind of carve us out, and CAO Lutz and I have had a brief discussion about this. But unfortunately for us, we're kind of statewide being attacked on fees. If you pull up some articles, I know the SACB and several of the Bay Area papers have really come after how we aggressively go after monies for parents whose kids are in juvenile halls, when at the same time we're not charging adults to be in jail. And so all of the juvenile supervision fees are under attack. Adult supervision fees are also under attack. So that's a touchy subject. I'd love to have some further conversations with you about that, but just in case anybody's wondering why I'm not going after fees, that's one thing. Now, what we have done is we have partnered with the Franchise Tax Board to make sure that those that are supposed to be paying us or are supposed to be paying a victim aren't off probation and years later and they're working a job and they never paid for anything, aren't just skating with it. Those wages should be garnished, to be quite frank. Sorry if that sounds a little tough. But you have an obligation to pay somebody. Without the Franchise Tax Board, we weren't really able to do those collections as well as we should. So I think, was that within the last year, Rebecca? Do you know? Yeah. So it's fairly recent, but we are starting to see some returns on that. The work program at the jail. So we funded that through AB 109. It hadn't been going for quite some time. It's doing some good things. I wish it was bigger. I wish my day reporting center offenders were participating. We've had some insurance hiccups that we're still working through, because the jail guys are covered, but the day reporting center people aren't because they're not in the institution. So long term, hopefully we'll resolve that. But it's a good program, and we're funding it through AB 109. We got involved in statewide issues so that at least we have a voice in probation and criminal justice community corrections matters. I've been pretty consistent about attending my Chief Probation Officers of California meetings, CPOC. So, we have a voice there, we're represented there, and frankly, we keep up with legislative issues that we did not keep up with before. We have by far at least doubled our training expectations, if not more. Some of that includes because we became armed. We were, the 54th county to become armed. Everybody else was armed, and you were here for that. But along with an armed training program is just a ton of work. And I was vocal about, I'm not an expert. I never had an armed assignment. So this was, building it from the ground up. And Jackie Jones, who's here today, is our range master. The sheriffs have been great in kind of helping us along and building that. There's a lot of things we still have to do, including the use of force simulator that's in the AB 109 requests. There's a lot of things we're doing to make sure we're responsible. They hadn't had any weaponless. When was the last time, Ben? When was the last time you guys had consistent weaponless defense training? Yeah. Right. So Ben's one of our. So you can't just hand them a gun and say, "Well, here's your gun." It's a complicated issue. So if you see our training line item, if it's if it seems inflated, it's not. And I'm using a lot of state funding when we can. When it's reasonable, we do that. But it's important stuff. We were so undertrained, underprepared, and I'm building up a very green, very eager department, but very green from the top down. We hired an outstanding CCP analyst. I wish he was here, but he's getting us, Mike Hatfield, he's done a lot with data that we frankly did not have before. I'm very thankful to have him. Reoffense rates are trending down, especially with our supervised populations. I look forward to coming and giving you a more thorough presentation on that, but to get into recidivism data and some of the ifs, ands, and buts would probably stall us for hours and hours and hours today. Unless you have a formal background in criminology, some of this stuff gets a little touchy, and it would be really easy for me to come in and make things look good unless you're able to kind of ask tough questions and pick it apart and that kind of stuff. So I think that should be in a separate presentation. I will say that with our supervised populations, we're seeing very good results as far as reoffense rates, even after they're off probation, with the offenders who've participated in our day reporting center programming. Budget. I'm getting close to done here. So we were funded at 1.5 million plus before the kind of housing market dropped. And I think a lot of departments probably went through a similar thing back in 2007. So from 2006 to 2008, we're up at 1.5 million of a general fund contribution. Right now I'm asking for 1.1. So we've come down a little bit, yet we've been able to do some good things in recent years to move our department forward. I'm not asking for more money. I was asked that yesterday. I'm not asking for more money. I'm asking that we just stay status quo. That's what I was advised to prepare. But I wanted you to see the value you're getting for status quo. That's all we need. If it's not going to be status quo, and if there are going to be aggressive cuts to public safety, then what I just detailed, I would come back to you with a plan of what out of those things that I just described that we should take away. Because I don't know. I mean, I made these adjustments starting Thursday night. So there's no way that I could have a rational plan for how I would cut our department substantially. As of today, we're getting 1.67%. 1.67% of the general fund contribution in this county. So if you have a $65 million budget, and we're 1.1, that's where I came with that number, 1.67% of that. If we were actually to cut my department by $518,000 that was initially recommended, that, in my opinion, is a gross disproportionate attack on public safety. That being said, out of that $518,000, I don't see any county general fund savings anyway. You grab a different document here. On those 6 positions that were listed, 2 don't exist, 2 are already filled, and 2 are SB 678 funded. So if we need to save money, I'm happy to go back to the drawing board and come back to you guys and tell you how we should save money. If that's what I have to do, hey, I've been there before. Nobody likes it, but it needs to be spread across the county. That's my one thing that I ask, and not just a slash to my department. But again, those 6 positions that would get us to $518,000, 2 of them don't exist. They exist, I believe, on the position control list, but they don't exist on my org chart. I think they're positions that were supposed to have been eliminated off the position control list and weren't. So that's fine. Those two should be taken off the position control list, and hopefully on paper, at least it shows that we are saving money. In actuals, we're not. 2 positions are SB 678 funded, and again, the other 2 have already been filled. I take major issue with the hiring freeze. Most of my people leave, and I can replace them because I believe that the CAO will sign off on grant-funded positions, 678 positions, 109 positions. But, in the event that I leave, I'm general fund. You have to have a chief probation officer. It doesn't have to be me, but you have to have somebody. So, if I leave, if Kim leaves, Ben, and then my rookie PO who started Monday, those are the 4 general fund sworn positions. And then I've got support staff that are general funded as well. So if one of those support staff or one of us leaves, then what? I have to take off of that list. We can't just do more work, not unless we inflate the overtime budget, and then where are we? And I don't have an inflated overtime budget. We need fiscal responsibility. I want it too. I live here. I live in Gold Creek, Valley Springs. Kid goes to Calaveras High School. I care about our schools. I care about our community. I love this county. I love my job. I want fiscal responsibility too. I think you're on the right track of wanting to look at revenues. How do we get the revenues up in this county? I just don't know how to go too much leaner than what we already are. I ran the numbers, and I'm sorry to dime out my partners here, but we're at a $23 contribution per capita. The probation department general fund contribution is at $23 per capita per resident. It's 38 in Amador, it's 58 in Tuolumne. I'm doing the same job they are. Their general fund contribution for their juvenile hall alone is more than my entire general fund contribution for this county. So if I seem like I'm a little angry, at some point it does kick in. I know the job that you guys have. I don't mean this to sound like an attack on you. I know how difficult it must be, because I don't even understand most of what you guys have to deal with. But at some point, and my story is not unique. All the other department heads are going through this too. I just ask that it not be disproportionate to public safety if you do have to cut. So I would ask that if there is going to be a hiring freeze, that we be exempted from that hiring freeze. And I would ask that long-term, rather than making substantial cuts to 3 departments, I believe, the public safety departments, that those cuts be made across the county. And with that, I will be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Leach. You sure can, CAO Lutz.
I figured before the board asked questions, first of all, Sam, I wanted to thank you and also acknowledge to the board. Sam is the type of budget person who I like to see. When he and I met, we talked through his budget. He wasn't asking for general fund increases. Clearly, he's done, as he's indicated, really has saved for the rainy day by building those designated fund accounts, recognizing that if there are reductions, we need to look at, how we can support ourselves. And I know from personal experience that he will fight for every dollar in terms of talking to him about the Tuolumne Juvenile Hall and the prior agreement that Amador, Calaveras, and Tuolumne had on using that facility, and the rate that they want, which is an increase over our existing rate. And Sam and I have had meetings and multiple emails for the last month and a half, really trying to come to what's a tenable agreement. So I do want to attest to the fact that Sam, as I feel so many of our department heads, is a very, very conservative budget person and it's the challenge with this, and it's where I make the comment. I'm not a fan of hiring freezes, and I think ultimately the hiring freezes are not going to solve the structural problem as much as we need some very thoughtful, detailed discussions with our departments. For me, this is about getting us past a statutory deadline, so to speak, of June 30, and really getting to the real work and recognizing what those priorities are. And when we closed the hearings today, I kind of had a list of my statement that I might say to the board before the board has questions, beyond this. But I just wanted to make that comment now.
Thank you, Steve. Any other comments by the board members? Supervisor Tofinelli.
I do. Sam, you spoke that 9 positions in your office are grant funded.
State, yeah. To oversimplify it, yeah, whether they're SB 678, state monies that we expect, AB 109 positions, Title 4E positions, JJCPA, YOBG, some of our smaller juvenile revenue streams, yes.
Are they entirely funded by grants? In other words, there's no intermingling of...
Some are intermingled.
Okay.
So like with my supervisors, I have one of them that gets, like a $9,000. They're all very complicated, but it's not fuzzy math. So I've taken, I've oversimplified it by saying 4, but it adds up, and I'd welcome anybody to come look at it.
Okay. Thank you.
Further comments by the board? Supervisor Mills?
Good morning, Mr. Leach. Thank you for defending your department so well. You're touching about 2% of the population of this county. So it means 2 out of every 100 people that are on the streets somehow are impacted by what your office does. That's a big number. I would like not only your department, but all departments to be thinking of this in a broader spectrum of, instead of trying to look at a single year budget, and start thinking about what would be your goals over the next 2 to 3 years. And saying, this is the vision, this is what I would like to see ultimately, and the results of that. In other words, what do we expect to gain or lose by having that kind of vision? Your budget, to me, I had no challenges at all with it. As I was looking through it, I have those sticky notes. It's one of the few that doesn't. But it's important to know when you look at the SB 678 reserves and what you've done with that to me is a substantial win. And I think that we need to acknowledge that very clearly, that is a good direction to go in. But also to understand that the challenges to your cost structure for your employee staffing is not going to get lower over time. It's going to increase simply because of the salary benefit package adjustments. We look at and this is just a general discussion here, as we look at a 10% increase in a salary budget over a year, don't think of that as a doubling in 10 years. That's actually a doubling in 7.76 years of a salary benefit package. So we need to be very cognizant when we look at these budgets to realize just the impact over time on these budgetary decisions. So thank you for what you're doing. I would suggest very strongly again that any department be looking less towards this preliminary budget and more towards what they would like to see over the coming 3 years, and let's start thinking in longer terms and start thinking about what additional support you need to make your vision happen. And that is my comment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Mills. Anybody else? I have a comment. Mr. Leach, I have personally experienced the problems when you first came on board. We had several discussions, and I must admit, I thought you were out there a little bit.
I am.
You have done a fantastic job.
Thank you.
I've worked with these probation officers. I've seen you perform. I've seen you conduct this department in the most professional way that I've never seen before. I wish there was a way we can put you in a can and make you available for other departments, maybe other counties, to see how to, number one, square away a department. Number two, do it by saving over $400,000 in your allotted funds and bringing up the standards of your department to where they are now. I will commend you, and I will support you in this budget period and in future. Contrary to Supervisor Mills, who states you must look towards the future, I look towards the past. I saw what happened then. I see what's happening now. Don't change anything. Keep going. Thank you very much for your service.
Thank you as well. And just briefly, I'd like to pass that along to my team.
I hope they listened,
Yeah, most,
because they deserve just as much allocated as you do, sir.
Yeah.
It's a team effort, and you've done an outstanding job, folks.
thank you so much. Any other questions?
Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Leach.
Thank you.
Before we start, I'll give you a little brief schedule. We'll be taking a break at 10:30, and hopefully we'll be going to lunch at 12 o'clock. Is that acceptable for staff and for everybody out there? Give you a little advance notice so you can plan your day accordingly. All right, Mr. Krovis, I believe, Public Works? No, public comments are going to be reserved until the end of all presentations by departments.
Thank you, Board. Jeff Krovitz, Public Works. Be going through the major divisions in Public Works one by one, and I will take my lead from the Board. If you want to stop and discuss individual divisions, we can do that. The first division that I want to talk about is the Equipment Service Center. It is established as a standalone budget unit. We operate on cost recovery, and we perform services to Public Works equipment and vehicles for all divisions, including transit and integrated waste management. The current budget is relatively flat from the previous year as instructed. We are not at full staffing out there due to recent resignations. But we are continuing to realize some decreases in the cost of our maintenance due to increasing experience of the staff and due to the replacement of transit buses with newer vehicles. Questions on Equipment Service Center? That's pretty straightforward. We do have some plans for modifications in there. We've been given recommendations from Auditor Controller to try to move closer to a true cost recovery organization, and also attempting to identify a methodology for fleet and equipment replacement capitalization. Of course, takes a lot of money to be able to do that, and we are horribly or critically behind at this point. I'm sure that the board is aware of that. Any questions on this, or shall I move on? Okay. Public Works Administration provides the administrative oversight and support for all budget units within the department. We have been working diligently over the last 2 years at the implementation of a department-wide safety program, and we feel like we are getting results from that. It will tier into a similar safety program that HR is planning on rolling out this year, and we will provide support for that. Our staffing, again, with all departments, and I'm sure it's all throughout the county, we have been changing, had several retirements, and we are filling. Our business administrator position is currently open, but we performed interviews last week to try to fill that up. We've had some modifications in terms of the assignment, of the primary assignments of duties of some individual staff to make them more compliant with the budget units where they are doing their work. And that really is the cause of the very minor change in the budget from the previous year. So again, Public Works Administration represents a flatline budget. I don't think I need to mention, but I will anyway, that Public Works receives the vast majority of its funding through grants and external revenues, and is not department that's dependent upon general fund. I believe we're also the largest department in terms of the volume of capital for both revenues and expenditures. You saw that yesterday in CAO Lutz's presentation. Moving on to public transit. Public transit represents approximately 1% of the entire county budget, a little bit more of that for the public works budget, and it is a system that is constantly changing. In my brief tenure, we have added and removed services, we have added and removed stops, we have added and removed funding. The board took action in April to change some of the routes that were a response to recommendations provided in the short-range transit plan, and those routes have now rolled out to provide more or a high level of service along the spine into Columbia College, where our ridership was relatively high. We expect these changes to continue. I will be back in front of you on the 27th for requests for support on removing intercity service because of its low performance and low ridership, and some other changes to the system. We expect the changes to the system to continue as we attempt to implement, to the extent possible, short-range transit plan, as well as to reach a fare box or targeted fare box recovery, which is the primary method of measurement of our performance. Looking at the budget, some of our revenue has been slightly reduced due to the funding programs from the state. We will try to either backfill through savings in other areas or modifications in services. In general, the types of modifications that we're talking about is if we're having an underperforming route on a fixed schedule, potentially to change that route to a dial-a-ride or a demand response, a call-in and response to meet the needs of the people that are actually asking for the rides when they want the rides. We do have a slight increase because we are anticipating an increase in our maintenance and fuel costs for the next fiscal year. But overall, of a $1.2 million budget, it's only about a $66,000 increase, and we believe that is funded. We will be able to fund that through our revenues. In terms of the capital highlights, we're currently in the process of a grant to replace one of our oldest buses. We hope that comes through, and the other capital programs that we are attempting to implement really has to do with the continuation of improvements at the bus stops, some lighting projects, and then an AVL system which provides location of the buses, and it also collects data for ridership and then times of service. So we're attempting to implement that service, that system within all of our transit buses. Moving on to the capital improvement program. The capital improvement program in this discussion deals with capital improvement programs for roads and bridges. Those are large capital projects as opposed to large maintenance projects. The transit projects, the transit capital projects, integrated waste management division capital improvement projects. This is pretty much executed by our engineering staff, our professional engineering staff and engineering support staff. And they include programs that are state and federally funded through a variety of sources, with some backfilled by local funding through programs such as our RIM fee funding for impacts of development, and sufficient. We currently have some major projects that we anticipate that are either currently in construction and that will be finished in the 17-18 year, or we expect to go into new phases of development in the 17-18 year. I've highlighted them, but I'll reiterate them now. Our Railroad Flat Bridge is currently in construction for replacement. That is 100% funded external to the county through the use of highway bridge program with toll credits for our local match. We expect that project to be completed in the 17-18 budget year. Stagecoach Road, Loadwater Crossing, down in the Copper area, we anticipate moving that into construction as we have cleared all environmental hurdles. We expect to execute utility relocation along Burns Ferry Road so that when funding becomes available, we can install a left-hand turn lane pocket to improve the safety of residents that are coming in and out of their subdivision onto a Burns Ferry Road. The Wagon Trail project was completed with the project approval and environmental document stage early this year, and in August we anticipate appropriation from California Transportation Commission, at which point we will be moving into construction document preparation and right-of-way acquisition according to the available funding. Available construction funding at this point is a combination of a special funded program through Caltrans to the tune of about $10 million, included in addition to about $2 million that the county has in regional transportation funds identified for this project. There is a current grant application that we are hoping to be successful that would add an additional $16 million in construction funds to this project. But we will not have information about that for a little while yet. In terms of the program highlights, in terms of major highlights, it is very close to a flat line budget from the previous years. There are some fund savings due to de-obligations of some projects and some funding for other projects coming from various COG funds through the COG. But in general, we are flat from the previous year. Roads and Bridges Division, that is my division that is primarily an operations and maintenance division and a response to events and problems that are discovered or called in on our roadways. It includes snow plowing services up at elevation, roadside vegetation management, response to emergencies, support of emergency service providers during emergency response, as well as traffic control, some bagging stations during storm events. And we have, as a division, been significantly impacted by what appears to be the last year and a half of ongoing disasters that we've experienced. The disasters have adversely affected the quantity and the structure of our roads, in addition to changed environment, meaning that effects of the fire are felt during heavy rain events, causing us to go out and respond where we would not normally have responded in the absence of a fire event. We wouldn't be responding to a storm event. That's just an example. We are also attempting to the best of our ability to continue and move the programs along through state and federal government for fire recovery, for disaster recovery, with the exception of the tree mortality, which is currently under admin. We'll continue to work on these programs, but that's not truly part of this Roads and Bridges budget. The Road and Bridges staffing is, for the most part, full to the level of what we have identified, but we used to run 4 full districts among the 5 supervisory districts. They would be 4 maintenance districts. We are now down to 3, and we're finding that given our funds and given the demands on our staff, we are better off combining some of our maintenance crews to take on some of the larger projects that we have in front of us. And so we are focusing on the highest priority projects that we need to work on, essentially borrowing from other districts and then doing the same as we move around the county. In general, the way we do our work is that in the fall we do prep up in the high country. In the spring, we try to do as much work as we can in the lower country, down west of 49, before the temperatures get high, and then move up the hill through the summer to continue these projects, patching, paving, ditching, culverts, that type of work. It's worked pretty well for us, and but given what we have, that's how we do it. Our snow plowing is all done by, not all done, it's supplemented by extra hire staff. So when we get events that require immediate response, we'll respond with full-time staff, and then we supplement that with part-time extra hires. There are 25 to 30 part-time extra hires that may be called into service. We are keeping that number at the same, and everything is dependent upon the amount of snow we get and when it occurs. Final major area, of course, is integrated waste management. It deals with the operation of the active Rock Creek landfill. It deals with the closure of the Red Hill landfill. It deals with the operations of our transfer stations throughout the county. And at Red Hill, we have 3 areas of current operation. One is a transfer station. The second area is essentially a green waste station for residents to bring their green waste to, and the third area has been recently developed for hopefully the dealing of tree mortality waste, all at Red Hill. The division itself is funded, as board knows, by $150 per year parcel fee, and then whatever grant programs we can get to support or supplement our diversion recycling requirements. Last year, we also executed a longer-term fee-based permit for the collection of solid waste and green waste through a partner, Cal Waste, and that program is beginning to return some revenues that weren't previously available to us. So while our budget is up a bit, so are our revenues that are fairly commensurate with each other. Unfortunately, I wish I could say that the revenues from the curbside collection will be consistent, but since part of the revenues are a fixed revenue and part of the revenues are based upon payment for recycling, diversion, and that is a commodities-driven market. When gas prices tend to be high, so do those commodity prices that we can get. The recycling market is a difficult market. The revenue streams based from month to month or season to season are inconsistent. We realize approximately 90% of the revenues that our hauler gets when he sells that material, segregates and sells that material. We have a number of capital projects that we currently have in the process, trying to catch up with deferred maintenance on things like our scale, our gas flares at Rock Creek, also the replacement of our gatehouse, which is in construction. We expect it to be finished within this summer, which will provide a more secure and a better location, same location, but better amenities to our gatekeepers. We are attempting to continue with the capital replacement of some equipment, including the replacement of a loader that was destroyed in a fire last year. In addition, we are continuing to make deposits into our capital funds, both for capital improvements at Rock Creek and closure at Rock Creek, in addition to capital deposits for future closures of the Red Hill facility. Long term, this is not necessarily enough to assure us that we will be where we need to be whenever operations at these facilities cease in the future. However, there is a significant amount of essentially deferred work and analysis within the division in terms of how do we operate, what are we required, what kind of staff will be necessary to support this operation, what equipment will be necessary to support this operation, what is the implementation plan that we need to do for landfill cells versus recycling infrastructure versus green waste that are coming to us. In addition to that, we have a constantly changing regulatory environment with some very important sunset dates that are coming our way in 2020 that affect the cost of our operation and what we can do. One example, of course, is green waste. In 2020, we will no longer be able to count the use of green waste as intermediate cell topping at the landfill as daily cover. It will essentially be counted against us as solid waste. So we are working as actively as we possibly can to look for methodologies and partnerships whereby we can be pushing the green waste that we are collecting out of our landfill and into reuse or land use applications. I think I will close there. At this point, trying to keep room for your questions and still maintain schedule. I can answer questions on CSAs, lighting landscape districts, other special assessment basins, but those are all very, very small when compared to the other divisions that I talked about. So I would take questions at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Provost.
Yeah,
Supervisor
Jeff.
Toffenelli.
I just had a question on Red Hill. When I was there, I visited that site back in February, and just a quick safety note, there was a tree, when you pull in, there was a tree like leaning out over the ridge there on the side. That was due to be removed because of the safety issue? It looked like it was going to fall. Do you know if that's been removed or?
No, I don't. I will double check and get back with you.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
We did remove or remove tree mortality trees at Wilseyville and at the Avery station. And we will hope in the future to be able to reimburse our expenses on that through the tree mortality program if available. So, all right, thank you.
That was really the only question I had. Going over your budget, it's pretty, I mean, like you say, very, very little general fund. So.
Supervisor Mills.
Yes, sir. Jeff, I'm questioning whether or not there's going to be any extended costs for the NOV at Rock Creek, and whether that needs to be in this budget.
And I would say NOVs.
Yeah, it's a series.
There's a series of them.
Yes.
That was kind of an unfortunate series of events, but to answer your question directly, we do not anticipate, there may be some expenditures in terms of minor field kind of corrections if it's dealing with a drainage, but the reality was that when we had, by the time we had received the letter from the state, we had already corrected a vast majority of those and reported and provided the state with evidence of what we had done. So those have already been dealt with. Other ones require a more study to come up with a well-engineered and well-thought-out solution for long-term on some of those issues. But we don't really feel like, even though there are notices of violation, we feel like the timing of this and the dealing with this needs to be actively essentially negotiated and implemented in a thoughtful way with the Regional Water Quality Control Board. To that end, we are scheduled to meet with them next week up there. Major expenditures, I don't see it. I really don't see it. And that would include, I would assume your question would extend to some of the violations we're currently experiencing at Red Hill. Same thing is true. There might be a possibility of some capital expenditures there that we would be required to invest to eliminate these notices. Currently, we believe that there is enough money in the closure funds for both facilities as well as in the capital funds for both facilities to be able to handle these, because we see these as fairly small. The large dollar items really out there deal with infrastructure to support the closure and expansion of the landfill cells and the leachate pond. That's probably the largest single expenditure that we are facing in the future, and that's probably 3 years down the road. But I also don't think that that expenditure will wipe out our current capital fund. So I hope that kind of answered your questions.
Yes, I just wanted an awareness that is an outlier here in this budget, and it could have an impact in a future budget adjustment, but just be aware that it's out there.
Yes.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and this is more for a COG item, I think, than anything, is whether or not transit really can justify one FTE in that position list, or whether we need to be looking at something else. Because year over year in these budgets, and I've sat through these budget hearings even before I was a supervisor, I keep hearing the statement of anticipated increase in ridership, and yet it doesn't happen. So I would challenge that statement only because history doesn't indicate that has borne itself out. So what kind of activities we've tried to do over the years to increase ridership is one thing, but whether or not we've achieved the goal of the fare box recovery is quite another. So the goal has to really be set clearly at that 10% fare box recovery, and we need to drive to that goal as our ultimate solution. Each one of these major capital projects that we do are going to expend a lot of time and effort on your part for your staff to make them accomplished. Maybe we need to, as we did with COG, look at the list and say this is the stage that project is in, so that the rest of the supervisors clearly understand what stages you're in with each one of these projects and what expenditures are going to be needed in this fiscal year. Not that they'll be completed, but that we're in this particular phase on a project. So just having that clear understanding that this doesn't mean simply because you're expending money that's going to finish the project. That's something that might be out there till 2020 or 2022. So that's just part of the ultimate. I really would like to see some type of an improvement at Copperopolis. I know that you have been down to that site, and the way that they've got the Avery site set up is spectacular by comparison. And the number of close calls and potential accidents and the risks that we face down there simply because of the way the traffic is being moved through that area, it creates challenges, and I know it creates additional manpower needs simply to avoid the fisticuffs that occasionally do occur. So any way that we can kind of not start something, maybe start something in the thought process each year, not expecting that we will get anything done, but it just needs to be something that we need to look at. So I'll defer the rest of it. Oh, on rim fees, is there any way that those copper rim fees, the benefit basin fees, could be used at all towards that O'Byrne's Ferry project? That's an out-of-the-box question. I hadn't even discussed this with you.
My response is that when the rim fee program was put in place and the nexus was defined, there was a long list of projects developed for which these rim fees were being collected. And then there were percentages of impact directly attributable to future development assigned to each one of those projects. I would have to go back and look to see if O'Byrne's Ferry was identified as one of those. There is nothing wrong with the board adding at any given time, us bringing an item to the board to add at any given time. So
I'm just looking at that as possibly a financial option here, maybe not for the total, but at least for a part, keep the project moving along. The other thing is the CSAs, and I'm sure that in other districts as well, have suffered severe storm damage, of which they're not financially capable of handling. And I know the county is working diligently in all of the road systems to try to make those repairs, and it's very much appreciated what they're doing. They've actually identified the most serious, and I think that's what they're going after first. But those CSAs, we need to kind of prioritize them too, because I know many of them just do not have a budget necessary to make the needed repairs that they need to make before the next rain season. And I'm understanding that the next one will be also a lighter El Nino. So if that is the case, we need to start thinking now about what that impact might be in our future projections. And thank you for making a presentation today.
Okay. In response to some of your points, the transit manager is a full-time position. The amount of work involved and the amount of coordination involved in even changing a route is significant in terms of the outreach, the oversight, the coordination, the understanding of the funding, the process whereby we go with our stakeholders, which would include COG and City of Angels, to do that work. Additionally, in this next coming year, we are going out to an RFP to competitively bid the operations end of transit. And there is that work and the management oversight of that contract, which is a fairly large contract. And then finally, there is some management oversight duties that have to happen of that contract. So, frankly, I have a difficult time seeing how we do that with less than a full-time position, even if we were able to pull the variety of capital projects out of transit and assign them in a different way or fund them in a different way. So it's a complex system. It really is a complex system, even though it represents a fairly small proportion of our entire budget. In terms of the copper site, we have looked at it. We have done some studies to see if we can. We do have a much larger site than we're using. Some of the thinking being that if we can segregate some of the green waste flows from the transfer station functions, we will relieve those pressures. That notwithstanding, while we do have the room to do that, to be able to expand into a lower field or lower area within that, the project site, the county's parcel, will require environmental clearance. We may end up being handcuffed by potential endangered species or habitat supporting endangered species, but that's a longer term look. I think I answered your question on the RIM fees and the CSAs in terms of storm damage. I couldn't agree with you more, and in fact, on the initial damage assessment to verify that the county had indeed experienced damage to the level where we would be eligible for grant funding. Many of the CSA roads were on the list, and some of them were inspected. Unfortunately, some of the damage, in the opinion of FHWA, to a couple of CSAs where we had some culvert problems, they attributed those not necessarily to the storm, but to the age of the culverts, which is very difficult for us. We could fight it, but it might be a losing effort. So, but we will continue. We're continuing to gather the data on damages, and we don't have a lot of time to add these to our list of projects before that opportunity expires. So we're working on that within the next week. More questions?
Any more questions from the board? Staff? I'm sorry, CAO Lutz.
I just actually one comment and then a question. First, clearly transit has been one of those concern issues for, I know, a number of supervisors on the board, which is why on the 27th, Mr. Krovitz is coming back with an overview of the transit budget, recommendations for changes that we might need to look at, and I think that would be a good opportunity to really start to drill down into that program specifically. And we timed it again feeling that we wanted the transit staff an opportunity to do some consistent research, work with the COG, work with the consultant to try and bring back a good recommendation for this board for consideration. So that's why that date was chosen, and I think they'll provide a little more detail into that particular area. Second, Mr. Krovitz, I was knowing where we are moving full steam ahead on SB1. I wanted you to address some of obviously with our final budget, we need to have those project plans in place and adopted by the board in order to be eligible for the funding, but also I want a discussion from you on the overall cost implications for us. Obviously, there's revenue, but there's also a threshold we have to reach in spending to get to that revenue, what that looks like, concerns from your end. And I know this is a continually evolving item, as so much of with the state. They are putting the wheels on as it's starting to roll down the road. But I also know that through your association and your group, you guys are getting the most up-to-date information probably, so I'd be interested in that.
Yes, and
I'm going to interject here, Mr. Clovis, for a moment. We're going to take our scheduled break, give you a few minutes to compile your answer, if you will.
I was prepared. I'm sorry.
That's okay. We'll give you a couple of minutes, but we're going to take a break at a request of the board. We'll be back in 15 minutes, folks. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Krovitz, I believe we're going to be discussing SB1 per CAO Lutz's request.
Yes, thank you, CEO Lutz. I had prepared to speak to it and then forgot about it. I'm assuming that the majority of the board understands that SB1 is a bill that was approved by Governor Brown in April of this year, and it is an attempt to supplement or expand transportation funding through the state of California through the implementation of new fees. New fees include excise tax on fuel, taxes on fuels, increases in vehicle license fees. It also includes, for the very first time, licensing fees for hybrids and electric vehicles or alternative fuel vehicles to pay for essentially their proportionate share of use on our public roads. So the taxes actually begin collecting, my understanding is November of this year, with anticipated distributions going out to cities and counties and Caltrans starting in the spring of 2018. So the 17-18 budget will be a small proportion of what is anticipated. Current estimate says that under the fixed funding scenario with SB1, the county can expect in the neighborhood of about an additional $800,000. That would be for a full year's funding. That funding comes with requirements. Some of the requirements we know, some of the requirements are in development as we speak. This week there are actually meetings at CTC attempting to develop these implementation requirements. One of the known requirements that we know about is that the recipients of these grant funds must provide by October, in the October timeframe of this year, a list of projects that essentially briefly describes the scope and the estimated cost, and that those projects must be approved by the elected officials in a public hearing and be incorporated as part of the budget for them to be qualifying to be able to spend SB1 monies on those projects. So I've instructed staff to begin preparing that list of projects, identifying priorities, and then I will be bringing that to the board for either concurrence or modification on the priorities on the projects based on your district needs, as well as incorporation of that into our capital program. So I don't believe that I can have that complete. It'd be nice to be able to do it by final budget. I just don't know if I can or I can't. So we will be working on that. Again, $800,000 doesn't go very far, but it is a help. SB1 also provides that allocation can go up if the receiving entity is what's called a self-help entity. And what's meant by a self-help entity is that, for example, the county would implement a sales tax measure on gasoline to be able to generate additional funds directed towards operations and maintenance of our county-maintained road system. And with the implementation of a self-help fund, as it were, then the proportionate share, there's another pot of funds that will then feed into those entities that are self-help. That is a political and discussion that we need to have to see if that is even a possibility in this county, given what our criteria and constraints are. So for the most part, that's my current knowledge of SB 1. I pretty much am getting updates every couple of weeks. Most of them come from CSAC. If you're interested in reading the details, you can go to the CSAC site, search for SB1, and you will get the links to not only the direct language of the law, but also the status of where the program is at. We will know as we go through the process, so we're very early in this process. Do you have questions on SB1 in terms of how it will potentially impact our roads and bridges budget?
I think in my world, I see it as a variable that until we actually see the money in our pocket, we just aren't going to make any adjustments in our budget. You know, prove that it's there, then we can talk about it.
Well,
So,
the
it's great to
caveat to,
promise.
yeah, the caveat to that is if we don't have it identified and in our budget, if the funds then make their way to us and we don't have it, we don't get them.
No, we can make the plans,
Yeah.
but the idea of feeling that we can carry them out won't really happen until we're assured we have something
Yes,
there that's
yes.
tangible.
Yes. The last thing, and I still have yet to verify this on SB1, is, well, there's two more things, one that I know and one that I'm uncertain of, so I don't even know if I want to speak to that. But SB1 also requires that the entity receiving the grant funds must have an active asset management system in place, whereby we are tracking the condition of those assets, those transportation assets that we have. And that's part of one of the work programs that we have developed with COG that we're hoping will be fully funded in this year, and we can get started on that to capture the paper asset information that we have developed in the past and get that into and conversant communication with our current GIS system so that it's readily available and easily maintained. So in the past, it appeared that the department had been doing asset management studies and analysis and documentation, mostly analog, every 10 years or so. It needs to be a part of day-to-day activities. And we have to make it or design the system with ease of data collection and ease of data input. Otherwise, and by all of our staff, the ones that are out there driving in the trucks, our roads and bridges maintenance workers, those are the ones that are actually collecting our data for us. And so there needs to be a fairly seamless, easy way of getting that into a system. So that's part of the design of what we're doing.
Mr. Groves, you're absolutely correct. CSAC is very active in looking at this bill. As a CSAC representative, and CAO Lutz and I attended the Legislative Center, seminar hosted by CSAC on this, and there seems to be some great concern of where these funds are actually going to be going, to the roads, schools, different areas like that. So it changes by the day.
Well, the legislation talks about the various areas that are eligible, and that would be road maintenance, pavement overlay, drainage, those types of infrastructure. They talk about complete streets, so that would be the accommodation of pedestrian facilities within our street system, sidewalks, bikeways, that kind of stuff. And then it also talks about transportation transit. So there is a piece that could go into an existing transit system. So,
And for the record, you also attended that session with us.
so and it was informative, but again, it's we're watching the development of something in its early stages.
Thank you, sir. Further questions for Mr. Crovus? Does that complete your presentation, sir?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you.
I understand that there are some department heads or departments that would like to make some additional comments. Is there any department available now that would like to make that comment? This is for staff departments for the county. Mr. Mauer, good morning.
Good morning, Peter Mauer, Planning Director. Just a very brief comment. I hadn't really planned to speak earlier, but I was so surprised about the proposed hiring freeze that I just learned about yesterday. Planning, it's not like public safety. We're sort of viewed as a necessary evil. In fact, back before I came on board, it was sort of the planning department was a place where projects go to die. And I hope that in the 3 years that I've been here, I've been able to change that perception and to help streamline the process, to be more responsive to the community. At the same time, I have reduced our budget, which isn't great. It was just over $1 million the first year. It's down to just under $900,000 this year, overall net county costs. But the results that we've been able to make in our department is based on good, competent staff. And I am very blessed to have some of the best staff I've ever worked with or have worked for me in my 30 years of planning profession. The hiring freeze would freeze out a position that is desperately needed in my department. I've been down to Planner 3 since October. I tried to fill it earlier this year and was unsuccessful, but working with Human Resources to reach out to do a broader search for qualified candidate. I feel it's, this is a critical position for our department. And I'm just talking about the day-to-day operations, normal planning operations, not anything to do with cannabis. We have a number of projects and programs that board members have been requesting, the Planning Commission have been looking for, things that I have identified in our zoning code that need amendment to improve our process. What I am proposing is that if there is a need to further reduce the budget, I understand the challenge that Tim has. It's a daunting process to look at our budget, look at the shortfalls we're receiving, and figure out how we're going to fund the necessary county operations. I'm willing to go back into my budget and look where I can reduce further. But I would ask that these essentially cuts, which is what a freeze would be for my department, and this is 20% of my net county cost, freezing these two positions. I can live without one of those positions, but I cannot live without the Planner 3 position, and I'd be willing to go back and work in my budget to find out where I could reduce another $107,000, which is the cost of a Planner 3 position when you add in all the benefits. So that's all I'm requesting is that these, and I think it's the same thing that Sam was saying. He's hit much more hard than I am. He had 5 positions that were frozen, I believe. That if these reductions in staffing, if we could look at that in the fiscal aspect of it and spread that evenly throughout the county, that I'd be more than happy to further reduce the cost to the county. But to have a sort of an arbitrary hiring freeze that affects several departments, and you've heard from them already, as well as mine. I think there's a better way that we can look at that deficit without hamstringing certain departments, without being able to fill vacant and much-needed department positions. So that's my request at this point in time. Do you have any questions of me?
Questions of Mr. Mauer? Mr. Mills? I'm sorry, Supervisor Mills.
Sorry. I first thank you for stepping up and making your position known. That is appreciated. I go back to, and I recall when the appeal fee was $100.
Yes.
And then it turned into $500. And having sat through many of those appeals before I was a supervisor and subsequently seeing many of them, the enormous amount of staff time that your people are putting into this and code enforcement is putting into this, I'm really questioning whether we're getting true cost recovery.
I can guarantee we are not.
And that maybe at some point we want to look, not so much even for the cannabis issue, but for all issues of saying, are we getting true cost recovery here for the amount of time? Because that is an expense to your department that you're not getting reimbursed for. And so I just want to make that point that I do understand it, and it is enormous.
Fees only cover about 10% of our budget. Everything else comes from the general fund. We have no outside revenue. There's no grants. There's no other special federal or state funding that comes to our departments. It's all general fund and a small percentage of fees. 4 years ago, a fee study was done for our department. It was tabled at the request of the then CAO, feeling that the board sitting at that time wasn't prepared to look at raising fees. So I am certainly prepared to bring that back, to revisit our fees. I know that raising fees are anathema to the public, to elected officials. We try to keep our fees as reasonable as possible, but they need to cover costs, at least a portion of the costs. A lot of what we do is affected by applications. Someone wants to develop land, and a lot of the work we do doesn't necessarily benefit that applicant. It benefits the general public, the people that around that, the analysis that we do, the environmental studies are not necessarily benefiting the applicant, although ultimately they are the true beneficiary of it. But what we do is look at the whole community, and I would like to think that the work that we do is benefiting the entire community. And so there's a good argument that some of that should be covered by the general fund. And so that debate has been going on as long as I've been in planning, and I'm sure much longer than that. But I think that there are application types that we don't charge enough for. I think there are some that we probably charge too much for, and we need to do a comprehensive look at our fees. I tended to work with Mr. Lutz to bring back some relatively simple fee changes that we have that would help streamline the process, as well as bringing before you sort of a complete list of all of the various special projects that we have in the works to set some priorities. We have much more than we can handle right now. When the general plan is adopted, we will have a long laundry list of implementation measures that will take a lot of time, staff effort, and cost to do that and to be in compliance with the plan that we hopefully will adopt in the next 6 to 9 months. So yes, we need to look at our fees, we need to look at our funding mechanism, and we need to look at where the priorities are. And I cannot accomplish what we need to do without that other position.
Mr. Mauer, I would support you in that effort, and I would like to personally commend your department and your staff for doing an outstanding job faced with the crises we have. Let's take cannabis out of the picture. We've put together a general plan draft in a short time that was not accomplished in the previous 12 years. Your department works very hard. They do very good work at what they do. And I would support that endeavor to go forward in the future. So, well noted, and we'll go from there.
Thank you very much.
Further questions of Mr. Mauer by staff or board? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there any other department head that wish to make a comment or department Staff? Seeing none, we'll go, I believe, CAO Lutz. You have comments?
Yes, thank you. What I wanted to do is kind of wrap up from the CAO perspective on budget before the board then has an opportunity to ask questions, provide comment, because I think it's helpful for me on getting direction from the board on the next steps and also direction to our department heads as we work through the next couple of months to identify long-term what our solutions need to be. So I noted some points that I was going to go through. Really, for me, when I approached this budget and looked at these challenges, what I see is, unfortunately, us repeatedly doing the same exercise and somehow expecting a different result at the next fiscal year piece. When we come into it and we still have a structural deficit, we're still trying to identify how we can bring in that revenue, which really points to us needing to change how we operate, change how we do business in some instances. And I do think in some areas we really are at that point where there are some cases where we have to spend money to make more money, so to speak. I know the district attorney in her presentation highlighted the potential benefits of that consumer protection unit. Certainly there's an opportunity there. There's opportunities to realign or restructure some programs. I, in this budget request, have proposed bringing the Office of Emergency Services back under the County Administrative Office and adding 2 positions underneath that. One, the basically Emergency Services Director position, but a critical position in there that I'd like to highlight is really the cost recovery and emergency coordinator. One of the areas that I think we've identified across the county is risk, where we're not making sure we're coordinating, tracking, and really maximizing our revenue potential or reimbursement potential. And disasters, particularly in light of the sheer magnitude of challenges this county's faced over the last 2 years, really brought home that critical vulnerability. And so I feel that ultimately that program will at least provide enough revenue with recovery efforts to make sure that we're maximizing our reimbursements, and then also make sure that we're doing effective coordination training for our department heads, our key disaster responders in the, when the next disaster hits. I'm sure Supervisor Tuffanelli will talk about a recommendation on economic development. I think that's areas that we really need to look into. In some of these, I know there's concern of, are we, when a department comes up with a new idea, are we really going to make money or break even? I might suggest if the board's concerned, we also look at creating limited term positions in there and asking for the report outs, asking for the data, really demonstrate the value added, compare it against desired goals and metrics, and then if it's a limited term position that isn't working out, then we have flexibility of saying, it was limited term, accomplished these goals, we're done with those goals, we terminate the position. Obviously, facilities and space planning, that committee is going to be important. Unfortunately, and I think it was also the district attorney that brought up the prior exercise in doing this, and nice giant work product and no result. I don't like no result. I don't think any of this board wants to see no results. So we are going to reform that committee. We are going to bring the impacted departments that we know are in subpar conditions or sitting on top of one another, develop a plan, bring that back to the board, and really have a in-depth discussion about what the county space needs are. And really there are a lot of those structural issues we need to address. There's a consistent lack of reporting and performance metrics that we have across the board, in part because we haven't asked for it, and in part because we don't have the systems in place and we're talking about manual entry. And I would say going into this budget building process, it was really difficult for me to build a budget with no goals for the departments really outlined. No yardstick of how effective any increases or changes there are. No real, what for the cost increase, what is the result? What is the county getting? What are the residents getting? And really focusing on the value added to the community. And I think that's a critically missed component in effective budget development and the budget management throughout the year, because then you're comparing against those metrics, those goals. Infrastructure needs are going to need to be addressed. I mentioned space planning. Technology, that's another area where I think we need to invest some to gain a lot more. Not having an HRIS system is exceptionally difficult. Prime example and we're still tracing back and reconciling the probation chief's comment on some positions that we're looking at on that list that he doesn't show exist, yet we have a position control number for. An HRIS system would be able to really drill down, make sure that we're effectively managing our staff, and that when we add a position, whether it's an extra hire or a regular status position, we can really track that, monitor it, and know what the costs are. Same thing with a budget module for our accounting system. It was exceptionally cumbersome for me to develop this budget binder with really having to piece together a lot of different reports, and the numbers could change through the process. And so while I feel that this binder accurately reflects where our budget is, I don't have 100% confidence in these numbers, because there were opportunities that things did get changed and not necessarily updated in this binder. So I really think looking at ways that we can more effectively manage our finances and our staffing, basically manage our assets, is what I'm looking at. On the frozen position comments, what I would say, I completely understand that all departments are running lean. I chose the option of looking at freezes as a temporary measure because looking at how departments are currently operating, that basically reflects how departments are currently operating today, rather than try and ask a department to make actual physical cuts to their budget at this point. In doing the math, roughly, if we take disaster cost out and look at just normal general fund expenditures, that $6 million, that equates roughly to 20% of the amount of general fund that we're contributing to departments. A 20% reduction is not a tenable reduction by any means. And so for me, it's what can we do to start to really think differently and reshape operations. And staff are tired. I know that that is systematic across the county, or systemic, I should say. And I would say that I think our staff are doing an excellent job with the resources that they've been provided. And, for us, it's now about how do we, put forth systems to help them and chart the way forward. So bringing it back to the board for those policy decisions, what I would make a comment on, one, there was a comment about general fund first and then grant fund second. Coming from subvented department myself and being very familiar with grant funds and leveraging your general fund dollars, in general, I think assuming you do grant or general fund first is a backwards approach. My assumption would be you're looking grant funds first and then general fund, and you use the general fund to leverage those grant funds. I recognize that requires reporting with the departments, and it's an administrative headache. Unfortunately, it's also the administrative headache that that so much of government is and has become. Probation pointed out a very, very critical piece that I'm very sensitive to, and that is supplantation. We have to be careful about making blanket assumptions on those reductions because we don't want to supplant funds that have a statutory requirement that we not supplant those. And those are considerations that we definitely will have on a case-by-case basis because it differs based on the program, based on the source of funds. So for me, what I'm hoping that we then look at for this next 2-3 months is what the board would like to see in terms of the position freezes. Are we continuing with the targeted position freezes, or we can do, because we do run into that issue of just across the board position freezes? Because as departments pointed out, this is why position freezes are not an effective long-term strategy, is you risk sacrificing some grant funds, you risk not doing work that you've committed to doing or that you can do because you have revenue with it, versus trying to selectively target just the ones that have a general fund, not just only general funded, but a portion of general fund to provide the match to fund that position. I really think when we get to the rubber hits the road, it's going to be sitting down with each of the departments and walking through their budget line by line with the department heads and looking for options that we can leverage strengths with other departments. Are there opportunities that we even need to look at merging service types to save costs? I think if we're looking at reductions, I think we need to also talk about what would we look at. Non-essential personnel, contract reductions, or just overall reductions, and let a department decide how they would want to do that. I think we also need to look to the designated funds. And again, this is that question about supplantation. We don't want to supplant, but we also have opportunities where we have been managing some of our designated funds, and those funds are growing, which is good. But we need to look at if the general fund is reducing its fund balance and reducing its reserve account, we also should be looking at our designated funds to be taking a proportionate amount of burden off the general fund. That's part of why they are there and why we build equity within those funds. What I would be curious on the board's recommendation is we can do this process either through, if the board would like to develop another budget ad hoc committee and have 2 board members sit down with the CAO and the department heads to go through those budgets, look at ideas, or we can continue with instead the board providing direction today and then going into the next couple months, basically direction of what you would ask departments to bring back to the CAO, what I would work with the departments on. And really in closing, I would just say again, we are in this cycle that I don't want to see. I think we can get past this cycle, but we need to look at it differently because we have been this repeated cut funds, then freeze positions, hold the line. And what it's done also is stifled innovation. You have departments that are working hard to preserve what they have, and they don't have time to focus really on new ways of doing things. And because we haven't been providing goals, we're not really aligning goals toward innovative practices, toward efficiencies. And so that goes back to that, doing the same exercise, expecting a different result. So those were my kind of general comments, what I'm looking for in that direction from the board, so that we can really do the critical work that I think this board's asking for and would like to see.
Thank you, CEO Lutz. Is there any comments by the board for Mr. Lutz? I'm sorry. Good morning, Ms. Callen.
Good morning. I just wanted to let the board know, the board I think it was 2012, actually passed a GASB 54 policy, which actually stipulates that restricted funds are to be spent first, general funds are to be spent last. That was a policy that was adopted by the Board of Supervisors. It went into effect for the 11-12 fiscal year, I believe. And we have really struggled to try to get departments to understand that that policy is in place. It is a requirement. But each department, in essence, has treated their designated funds as their own contingents and their own reserves, which is in complete conflict with that policy. And what it does is it does create a burden on the general fund that didn't necessarily need to be there. And these funds are accumulating at a very large dollar amount, which then brings up frustrations and arguments, whether it be with unions or the public. You know, when we sit here and have conversations about an $8 million gap, and they say, what do you mean you don't have any money? Because if they look at the CAFR, we have lots of money. It's just all restricted. But that doesn't mean it can't be used. But those kind of dialogues need to happen with the departments as part of budget to ensure that when those funds can be used, they are being used, as opposed to kind of being pushed off to the side. And that's what we've really struggled with over this last several years. I will send that policy to each one of you so that you have it. Do you have it? Okay.
Ms. Callen, are you saying that the policy is in place but not being followed? Is
Correct.
that what I'm hearing?
Yes,
Is the policy correct?
it is.
Okay. I'll be looking forward to see that policy.
Okay.
And if that policy is inaccurate or not working for the system, we need to change policy.
The policy is
After
in,
review and see if it applies.
the policy follows GASB. And the policy
All right.
was also reviewed by the grand jury auditor, and it was brought forth to the board. So it's in compliance with GASB and with GAP.
Okay.
So regardless of what our internal feelings might be about the policy, that is the policy that every local entity, governmental agency in the entire United States has had to follow.
I'll welcome the copy.
Yep.
Thank you. Further comments? CEO Lutz, I concur with your statements about what has happened in the past as it pertains to now. And we have been doing things maybe not the best way we can. I welcome your suggestions, and I look forward to changing our course of this trip. So I will support you in that manner and look forward to your recommendations. Further questions? Supervisor Tofinelli?
Yeah, I do have a couple questions, given the fact that there was presentations by the sheriff's office, the DA's office, and the probation office, bringing into question the amount of savings that are indicated in your memo to us. I think we need to clarify those before we go any further in order to find out the true deficit that we have, finding that they are claiming some don't exist, some are grant funded, and some are grant funded but assisted by general funds also. So I think we truly need to find out exactly what our deficit is so we can work forward from there.
I concur with that. The positions that don't exist clearly is a problem, and that's what I know. I was going to work with HR on reconciling the position control list. The assumption being on ones that do have grant funds attached to it is, if you have a position that and that goes back to, do you spend grant funds first or general fund first? I think we do need to have the discussion with the departments of, do we need to assign our activities toward those grant funds through this period to draw down those grant funds, and therefore free up that general fund amount. Is it always going to be a dollar for dollar match? You're absolutely right, it's not, which is the challenge that we have. And the alternatives would be just asking them, reduce your general fund by the amount indicated on there. That we wouldn't want to do it that way because, again, we targeted the programs that had vacant positions, and you'd be unfairly reducing public safety by their general fund amount. So that's where I made the comment from the board's direction. We could instead look at what the deficit is, spread that across departments based on the percentage of general fund that they receive, and ask them to basically pull out that much general fund to come into balance basically for this year's budget. In which case it wouldn't be a position freeze, it would more be a targeted general fund reduction, and then when we work through July, August, come back with a final budget in September, that gives us an opportunity to make different adjustments. So a position freeze was one option, but we can, and I can run those calculations to see basically the percentage of general fund that each department uses, going back to that, those summary numbers, and then basically backing that $6 million into all those budgets and saying all departments reduce by this amount. That would be an alternative way to do it if we're worried about that we lose grant funds or have to shift duties around. And that's, I think, a policy decision from the board's perspective on how you would like to see that. It is ultimately a more equitable way to do it, but it does mean actually cutting from each of the budgets.
You said 20%?
If I look at that percentage, it becomes roughly 20%. That's correct.
Supervisor Mills.
Are we all going to take an opportunity to have an overview response or thought process analysis here towards the end, or do we want to do that
Yeah,
later?
what we're doing is addressing CIO's final wrap-up comments.
Thank you.
And then we'll have the opportunity to discuss it as a board, then we'll have public comment.
And I do have some more questions for CAO. Are you, giving what you just said and your wrap-up to us, are you, since by June 30th we need to adopt some preliminary budget in order to go forward in July until we get to the states adopting their budget and we come for our final budget based on theirs, are you asking us now to adopt the budget that you put in front of us and then between now and September when the final budget comes, at least we're operating? I need clarification on what you're asking.
I was asking the board to adopt as I laid out, correct, with those position freezes. There is, I think, time that if between now and then we instead would like to ask departments to then just tell us, reduce your general fund, make those revisions, to go back and make those changes, which then the board could adopt that alternative. You get to the same dollar amounts, basically. And I will say, I realize a comment on the $6 million and 20%. The amount that's in the salary savings or the salary reductions was the 3.3. That would be the number that we would be looking at targeting, or if we increase it. So it's less than 20% at that point because we're still using reserves. We're still using the teeter funds. So that would be closer to 12%. I mean, it's still a huge amount, but I realize I misspoke when the total deficit is that 20%. The amount that we're looking at in what I recommended for salary freezes equates to the 12%. And so that was my recommendation to the board because it was the easiest spot to quickly basically put a line item in there of, the salary savings or reduced position funding to bring us into balance, recognizing that it's not a long-term solution. It's not where I think we want to run this budget cycle out with. But again, a reduction across the board based on proportionate share could be an alternative, and we can then ask departments to make those reductions and submit new information. Again, once the board provides direction, we'll get that out to departments and ask for it right away.
Supervisor Mills, I'm sorry, Supervisor Tropiano.
That's okay, Ian.
Finish.
I just have one other question, and it has to do with the budget itself. And you brought it up, touched what I was going to talk about earlier about the Economic Development Director. And I see a slot in here and an amount for that position. Is that part of this budget? Is it included, or is it separated out on your projected budget that you have here? In other words, if we adopt it, it will include that salary?
It would include that salary.
Thank you.
Supervisor Mills?
So to your point then, when you're looking at the salary and the position control list, as you understand it, because I haven't seen it, we're not including in that list the other ancillary costs with those positions, meaning we're not including cost of turnover, payouts when people depart. There's a whole lot of other factors that are played into that. So we're taking a very, very broad brush approach when we're just saying position control list, and we're going to do salary savings based on freezing positions. That's such a wide swath that when we start to dig into the individual behaviors and policies that are driving those numbers, I think we'll see very quickly that if we simply reduce turnover, we might be able to see a salary savings very close to what you're asking for right now. So, it's great to look at it from that way, but I got to repeat, this is the first time I've seen a budget without a position control list, and it's very difficult to want to take generalities and then bleed them into specifics like this without having the total picture of what salaries and benefits and all of that position control list. Because when you make even changes to a position and you make it a new position with a different salary range and you do different, those are all modifications that should be included in this discussion are not here. So there's a lot of stuff that we're drilling down to just a little ball, and it's not a little ball. It's very large, and it's a big part of our budget.
Yes, and you are correct. It is a broad swath approach where those position costs only include your cost of that employee, your salary, health benefits, retirement. It does not factor in, obviously, those ancillary costs, the cost of turnover, et cetera. Although, again, because these positions are vacant, you don't necessarily have those costs with the position that you haven't brought on board yet. I think longer term that fits into the discussion of salaries overall. And if we're losing positions due to salary, obviously that's where turnover has a huge impact. What that doesn't assume, though, is the overtime cost that would be associated with keeping those positions frozen.
Captain Macedo.
Good
I
morning.
understand you may want to make a comment.
I did, and I was watching from my office. Did you drive fast? I did, and I almost ran, so
Give
if I
yourself
seem
a
out of
ticket.
breath, that's why. A couple of concerning comments that were made that I just want to address and make the board aware of, because our presentation, we didn't lay this out maybe as well as we should have. The sheriff's office had already been cut significantly, so if you do a percentage across the board cut at this point, it's going to equate to layoffs in the sheriff's office. I want to be unequivocally clear. If you do a percentage cut to the sheriff's office, we're going to lay people off. In order to fill those positions that were laid off, we are going to need to bring people back on overtime, both in the jail, in dispatch, and on patrol. So you already have a skyrocketing overtime problem, and it's going to continue to increase. We have no room to cut anywhere else. The last few budgets, we've had to do reductions because of principles that were set forth by the previous CAO's office, and we had to cut fuel, overtime, and auto maintenance, which were already exceeding our levels. There's nowhere else to cut from. I can't make that any more clear. So what you're going to have us do is lay staff off and then cut already underfunded line items that we know we're going to exceed throughout the year. So essentially, you're going to be building a budget based upon false pretenses, believing that we're going to be able to make, fit our expenditures within those line items. So my suggestion would be that the board prioritize where it is going to cut from and then work from there, rather than doing a broad-based cut across the board. I know we came and spoke about being opposed to hiring freezes. That's because the position we are currently in is already requiring us to bring people in on overtime in multiple divisions to backfill needed slots. So I think when you talk about doing hiring freezes and cuts across the board, that works in places where you've seen a steady increase in the budget or maybe a steady increase in staffing where you have places to reduce from. That's not the case here. And with respect to designated funds, sure, we should talk about designated funds and how they get utilized. I think that would be a huge eye-opener for the board because not unlike this building or this complex, there are several other parts of this county that have been neglected over the years, and that's what those designated funds are going to be used for. So if you use those to offset staffing costs because you're in trouble now, you are going to be in trouble later when other things break down that have a much more significant cost than doing minimal repairs as you go. And that's reflective upon the sheriff's office with our emergency communications infrastructure and a lot of other things we do to keep people safe. It's not about having somebody answer the front counter. This is about, staffing out on the street and keeping people safe, making sure you have somebody to answer 911 calls.
Thank you.
I have a question. Oh,
Yes.
sorry.
Captain, thank you very much. We're going to start digging into this budget and figure out where things are at here shortly. If you have to pick your poison, there's only so much money. Freeze or budget line or across the board?
Yeah, unequivocally, the answer is neither. Unequivocally, the answer is exempt the sheriff's office. If public safety is truly the priority for the budget, if it's truly the board's principles, don't just put it up there, act on it. And I'm sorry to be so upfront with you, Supervisor Garamendi, but I've seen it at the top of that list year after year, and I've seen boards do different things other than actually just putting it up on the board. I'm encouraged, hopefully, that this board will do something different. We have a new CAO's office, but if you're asking me, the answer is absolutely, unequivocally neither. Can we possibly contribute some funds to help offset things? Yes, but I think that is going to require a long sit-down conversation and a commitment from this board and the CAO's office that if we do make some commitments that they're going to pay dividends in the long run. Because unfortunately, I've been here long enough that we've made commitments before financially, and they've bit us right in the tail because in addition to making those commitments, we've brought upon a certain amount of workload only to have that money taken away from us the very next year, and that commitment was forgotten about unilaterally. And so that's the part about being here for 24 years that I've seen some really unpleasant things go on governmentally, and I don't want to walk down that path again.
Okay.
Before you leave, Captain, question. The comment that I kind of looked at for the, if we spread those reductions out across more departments, you currently, as we discussed, have some positions that are budgeted for but unfilled, correct?
Yes, both. Are you referring to general fund positions or non-general fund positions?
Well,
or
both, but
yes, but far fewer general fund positions than non-general fund positions, and I think that's the concern about when we looked at your presentation.
well, and that's why my question was, if we then were to turn around and try and distribute a reduction across the board, obviously the amount going to the sheriff's office now, basically by doing the position freezes, as you guys said, you unfairly punish those departments that have more vacant positions versus ones that might not have the vacancies. If we were to then spread that out across all departments, the potential reduction is smaller. Would you not be able to use some of those vacant positions as salary, basically what you would identify as what would be reduced rather than have to go into layoffs. Obviously, layoffs are what we don't want to see, and we're working to avoid at this point.
So to answer your question, potentially, I'm just concerned we don't have enough, and I would need to sit down with our business administrator and yourself, obviously put pen to paper and hear exactly what the percentages are and where, because I think there's some assumptions of where we can make cuts that are inaccurate. And one other thing that the sheriff and I have not burdened the board about, and we haven't brought to the public's attention yet, but I think it's probably time. It's become very fashionable to be anti-police in the United States and specifically California recently. And so the state legislature has been putting in an incredible amount of pressure on law enforcement agencies, which has significantly increased our workload behind closed doors and in the patrol car, with certain mandates that are coming down the pipe, requiring us to track things that we've never been tracked before. So I excuse the term here, but we almost feel like we're getting attacked from the state legislature, which is increasing our workload. The marijuana decisions in the county have increased our workload, yet our monetary amount and our ability to do our job is going in the opposite direction, so it's hurting. It's hurting us from two angles. So I want to caution the board that some of your budgetary impacts are exacerbating some of the things that the state is doing to us with respect to mandates about complaints, tracking just everybody we contact for every reason, and then the amount of requests we're getting for data and information that's affecting county council and some of the other departments. So there's a lot going on that we're trying not to burden the board with, but it is increasing our workload. We are trying to fight some of those off, but it's going to cost down the road.
Further questions of the captain? Captain, thank you for taking your time to come by and make that point. I am familiar with what you're talking about as far as the increased workloads of law enforcement, and I realize the problem being in that uniform at one time. At this point, is there any other board discussion before we open up to public comment? Okay. Madam Clerk, did you want to read anything on public comment, or do you think we need to?
So this public comment would be specific to the recommended budget, not general public comments.
And time will be 3 minutes. Okay? Public comment is open.
Good morning. I'm Vicki Reinke. I want you to know that I did watch all of yesterday's hearings so that I was caught up on what was presented. And thank you for the presentation, Mr. Lutz, that I felt like as a layperson, I started understanding better about what's in the budget. Came up with lots of questions, which I won't be asking you, but I'll do my research. Anyway, I know you guys are talking about priorities, and I think as a citizen, and I kind of like to say that I speak for the public, is that is important to set priorities in a county. Taxpayers expect our money to be spent for things that we feel are important and what we think government is about. In my lifetime, I've seen government go from being maybe something what we wanted to something that just spends money, things we don't really care about. So anyway, I just wanted to say that yes, I would say our priorities would be public safety first. I mean, that's huge. We can't do that by ourselves. That's why we pay taxes, so that we know we have good public safety. And law enforcement is a huge part of that. So I hope that that's a big focus. And things that maybe people don't believe our taxes should be used for are perhaps taking people in a bus to another county. I think there's other solutions to that. Now, I have to say that I don't know what the state has mandated on us, so I have to look at that. But I guess social programs, we need to look at those more carefully and see where we can save money there, maybe because we all believe that we don't have the law enforcement here that we need for our county, and especially with the issues that were presented with in the last couple of years. So I want to thank you if you look at those priorities, and please, when you look at your priorities, can you talk to the taxpayers? Can you find out what's important to them? And I know even the money that comes from grants and those kinds of things is our tax dollars. Everything is from the people. Government doesn't create money. All the money that comes to the government is from the people who have worked hard all their lives and have paid their taxes, and our kids who are paying their taxes today. So anyway, I think looking at that from that perspective is really important, so I appreciate that you're talking about doing that, and I think that should be the main part of your budget discussions in the future. Thanks.
Thank you.
Morning, Marty Crane. I just wanted to take us back a minute and say that I think, you know, I've attended all the Board of Supervisor meetings since well before 2002 and read I can't memorize them. I don't have total recall, but I read every single board packet. And so when something comes up, I go, I know we talked about that. I may not have total recall, but I know we talked about it, and it sends up a flag. So I just wanted to say that in all of these budget hearings, which we spoke before, they used to be 10 days and they were 5 days, and in the last couple of years they turned into like 3 or something like that. But I will say that while I looked around and all I saw was staff and a couple of other public persons, I found it to be extremely educational in how all our departments come together and work with each other, what their challenges were, what their opportunities were. And I have seen our departments evolve over the years where they were told to work together, find opportunities to share resources, and they did that. I also watched as across the board, 10%. I do recall 14% cuts across the board, a constant thing. It was like amputating our own structure. And then pretty soon it felt like we were going to cannibalize ourselves. So I don't want us to go there again. It's a huge challenge, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what our new CAO can guide us and help us to get there. But we do keep saying we're all about public safety, you know. So somehow we need to honor that, because they cannot do their job without the support that they need. And everyone always says public safety. By the way, that includes our fire departments too, which we don't bring up too often. But I wanted to just say I'm looking forward to what you will bring. Also, prior CAO Lori Norton shared some interesting things for us, and thank you. And she set us on a path, a 5-year path for solvency to keep us away from the bankruptcy edge. And all we had to do was stay out of the way and follow that path. It's all going to be painful. It was going to be painful. And so the success is in the details, but with the vision and getting down to the basics. And our opportunities are different today than they were back then. I think we all know that there are some revenue opportunities out there, and we can't deny them. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Further public comment? Mr. Fry?
George Fry. I served on the Vallecito Union School District Board of Trustees, and I was the board president for 3 years. And one of the suggestions that I made as the board president is that we hold a retreat every year. And at that retreat, all the board members would get together and we would make a plan for goals and objectives that we wanted to carry out for each year. And that obviously we would follow those goals and objectives. I have mentioned the same thing before in this arena here to board members, to all of the board members. And I think it worked very well, and it was very successful. And I would strongly encourage this board to do that and try and hash out some of this information amongst yourselves, and then come back after you've all put your heads together and had a lot of discussion. We met for 2 days, and I found it to be really beneficial to the board and to the school district and to the parents and the students. I would really, really encourage you to do that and get goals and objectives on paper and get them out there where everybody can see them. You know, we had some real challenges when I served on the school board. Budget challenges were there as well. And I just said, here's the budget. And the certificated people got together, and I said, where do you want to make the cuts? The same thing with the classified. And we didn't have people, attorneys, and all the rest of that. We resolved the issues ourselves. And hopefully with this retreat, you could work on resolving the issues.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Fry, we took your advice. We have a retreat scheduled.
Good.
Further comments by the public? Summit, yeah. G3. Any further public comment? Okay, at this time, I'll bring it back to the board. Any further comment, discussion by the board?
Mr. Chair, I suggest we go to lunch
Thank
until
you.
1:30, and when we come back, we can discuss amongst ourselves.
I will take that in consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you for leading.
I think we will break for lunch, folks. We're going to be back at 1:30.